You know, every 4 years, the whole world watches 22 people running after the ball in what we call the World Cup, or every 2 years, depending on how Arsene Wenger's proposal goes through. Anyway, despite all the political tensions in the world, football is usually a festival between two nations. Well, I say usually because sometimes things really get out of hand. But usually, as fierce as rivalries get, the action stays inside the pitch. More often than not, football can turn into banter with your friends, but a lot of times it's just harmless banter. Nothing more, nothing less. But that wasn't the case in June 1969, when Honduras played against El Salvador. Let me tell you one thing. This wasn't just any football match. This was a game that was being played at the backdrop of severe political tensions between the two countries. And it didn't help that the winner would qualify to the World Cup. Not that it mattered though, compared to what was going on behind the scenes. That being said, this football game was the last straw between the two nations to start a war. A war that was also called the 100-Hour War. Because, well, that's how long it took. But the question is, why did this football match start a war between two nations? What was going on at the time? Well, stick around to find out. Right, so let me tell you about the backdrop of the football war, where things were not going too well for these two nations. Just right off the bat, you're gonna notice that the one on the right is almost 5 times larger than the one on the left. But the one on the left had more population, most of which were farmers. And since El Salvador was overpopulated, a large number of people migrated to Honduras in search of lands to farm and live on, many of them illegally. So by the late 60s, Honduras was openly hostile to the immigrants, to the point of having land reforms that took the lands away from the El Salvadorans and forcing them back to El Salvador, even those that lived in Honduras for generations. The Honduras locals openly attacked the homes and the lands of the immigrants, and not only this wasn't condemned by the government, but also encouraged. The first wave of evictions came on June 2nd, as 500 families were moved by force from Honduras to the other side of the border. Imagine all of this going on, and just a few days later, we have a massive playoff between these two countries, where the winner qualifies for the World Cup. The first game was played in Honduras, where the hosts won 1-0. With tensions already high, fans of both sides clashed in the streets before, during, and after the game. There are even reports that the Hondurans gathered outside the El Salvador's team camp all night long and not letting them sleep. At this point, tensions were really running high, as the second game was about to take place, this time in El Salvador. This time, the tables were turned, as the Honduran players were kept awake all night long by the beating of the tin cans and things thrown at their window. The next day, the exhausted Honduras players couldn't do much against El Salvador, and they lost 3-0 to the hosts. And to make things even worse, El Salvador raised a dirty rag instead of the Honduras flag before the game. Yep, talking about trash talk. Mourinho, that's how you play mind games. These guys have been doing this since the late 60s. Anyway, things went from worse to, frankly, terrible at this point, as the Honduras players had to leave the game in a bulletproof bus. This really had far-reaching consequences in Honduras, where the El Salvadorans were attacked even more, with their properties demolished by the locals. But hey, this was far from over, as there was a third and final match to determine the ultimate winner of the spot in the World Cup. And this match was to be played in Mexico, where it would be a neutral ground for both teams. With the 90 minutes finishing in a 2-2 draw, El Salvador scored the winner in the extra time to make it 3-2, and they were the ones to qualify for the World Cup. Yep, talking about a dramatic match. But business was far from over between the two nations. But before we talk about what happened after that game, a lot of time goes into making these videos. So your like and comments really mean a lot to me, and it really helps out the YouTube algorithm as well, as this is a young channel. So, El Salvador won the playoffs to book their ticket in the World Cup 1970. Just a day after that, El Salvador cut all diplomatic ties with Honduras and launched an attack on the main airport in the capital of Honduras. By the way, just for a fun fact, since they both had US arms embargo and couldn't purchase weapons directly, they both turned to alternative sources to buy weapons, which also included some stuff used in the World War II. Therefore, the football war was the last conflict to have piston engine planes fighting one another. You know, the ones that have these. Anyway, the next day, more attacks came from El Salvador, and Honduras appealed to the Organization of American States. Under international pressure, El Salvador and Honduras agreed to a ceasefire, and just a while later, El Salvador withdrew all their troops from Honduras. And there it was, 100 hours of war that caused a lot of damage in economy and thousands of deaths, and a whole civil war later in El Salvador in future because they couldn't handle the influx of returning immigrants, which is beyond the subject of this video. So despite what the name suggests, the football war wasn't exactly caused by football. There was a lot of built-up tensions between the two countries. It was merely just a last straw for both nations to go for an all-out conflict. You know? And then they say video games make people violent. And in case you're wondering what happened to El Salvador in the 1970 World Cup, well, they were gonna shock the world with their strength and unity and be the talking point of the World Cup. And they lost every match they played in and crashed out of the World Cup in Mexico without scoring a single goal. Yeah, I know. Quite an anticlimax for all that war. So, what do you think about the football war? By the way, this is my 20th video for Football Drawn. It's honestly been quite a wild ride, and I only have you guys to thank for. When I made this channel, I always thought the football war would be one of my first topics, not my 20th. But hey, I guess better late than never, right? Let me know in the comments section below, but be nice to each other. I'm Football Drawn, and I like to tell football stories with comic and drawings. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of the channel as well.